There was a smell in certain black kitchens in 1974 that doesn't exist anymore. Not because the recipe disappeared from the world, because somebody made sure it disappeared from the shelf, from the cookbook, from the conversation around the dinner table. You could walk into a grocery store in 1978 and watch it happening in real time if you knew what you were looking at. Bright boxes lining the shelves where flour sacks used to be. Fast lines where a butcher counter used to stand. A pot roast that used to take a woman 4 hours on a Sunday now, sitting pre-cooked in a can, and a whole generation being told, quietly, without anybody ever saying it out loud, that the old way was slow, that the old way was poor, that the old way was something to be a little embarrassed by. Nobody held a press conference about it, family. Nobody wrote a headline that said, "We are about to erase the way your grandmother cooked." It never happens like that. Erasing a people's food happens the way most erasing happens. A little at a time, dressed up as progress, sold to you as convenience until one day a whole generation grows up and doesn't even know what got left behind. But some of us remember. Some of us can still close our eyes right now today and smell a pot of something that took all day to make and tasted like it took all day because it did. Because that was the whole point of it. Today, family, we are going back into that kitchen. We are pulling 20 dishes out from under the tablecloth. History tried to fold over them, and I promise you, by the time we get to the end of this list, you are going to understand something that goes a whole lot deeper than food. The dishes they wanted you to forget weren't just dishes. They were proof. Proof of a people who could take almost nothing and turn it into something that fed a family, healed a body, and held a whole community together on a Sunday afternoon. Hey family, I'm James. And today we're going back to the 1970s, to the soul food kitchen before the shortcuts came in, before the cans, before the boxes, before somebody decided slow was something to be ashamed of. Now, before we get into it, if this is your first time sitting with me, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here of folks who remember and folks who want to remember. So go on, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and let's go on back into that kitchen. Number 1, cracklin cornbread. Now, this one's a good place to start because it tells you everything about how these women thought. Hog killing time in the fall, a family renders lard from the fat, and what's left behind, those little crisp bits of pork skin and fat, the cracklings, didn't get thrown in the trash. They got folded straight into the next batch of cornbread, all through the batter, not sprinkled on top for show, like you might see at some restaurant charging you $12 for a wedge of it today. Every bite carried a little pocket of salt and crunch breaking against the soft, warm crumb. That was a Tuesday supper item in a lot of households. Family, made from something that would have gone to waste otherwise. Folks don't do this anymore, and that's a shame, because what got lost wasn't just a recipe. It was a whole way of looking at your kitchen and saying, nothing here is garbage until I've thought hard about it first. Number 2, hot water cornbread, fried right there in the skillet. This one belongs to the households that didn't always have a working oven or didn't want to heat the whole kitchen up in the middle of a Mississippi August. Cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt, worked together and shaped by hand into little patties, dropped straight into a skillet with hot grease until the outside went dark gold and crackled and the inside stayed soft as pudding. Back in those days, this was survival food, and it was Sunday food, depending entirely on the week you were having. It didn't need a recipe card. It needed a woman's 2 hands and about 10 minutes on the stove, and that was supper handled, no matter what else was going on in that house that day. You understand me? Some of the best cooking that ever came out of the Black South was cooking born entirely out of not having what you needed and making it anyway. Number 3, souse meat, made fresh at home instead of bought sliced at the counter. Some folks called it head cheese, though that name never sat right with the women who actually stood over the pot making it. This dish was born straight out of necessity and straight out of genius, both at once. Nothing went to waste in these kitchens, family. Nothing. The parts of the hog that a modern grocery store wouldn't even put on display. Big Mama simmered for hours until the meat fell soft and the broth turned to its own natural gelatin. Poured it into a loaf pan, let it set overnight in the ice box, and sliced it thin the next day, dressed with vinegar and a little hot sauce, eaten standing right up at the counter. That was frugality turned into craft. That was a family refusing to waste a single part of an animal that cost real work and real money to raise. Number 4, chow chow, put up in jars every single fall. A relish of cabbage, green tomatoes, peppers, onions, whatever was left hanging on in the garden right before the first frost came through and killed it all. Chopped fine, cooked down in vinegar and sugar and spice, sealed tight in mason jars, and lined up on a pantry shelf or down in a root cellar to carry a family clean through the winter months when nothing fresh was coming out of that ground anymore. This wasn't just a recipe, family. This was a survival system, built by hand, jar by jar, every September, so that come February there'd still be something bright and alive sitting on the table. We'll come back to what that really meant before we're done today. Number 5, buttermilk pie. No fancy ingredients required. Buttermilk, eggs, sugar, a little flour, a splash of vanilla if the house had it that week. Poured into a crust and baked slow until the top went golden and cracked just slightly across the middle. This was dessert for a family that didn't have money for anything fancier, and I'll tell you something. Family. It stands up today against any dessert you'll find on a menu with a French name and a $30 price tag next to it. These recipes were never poor food pretending to be rich food. They were their own thing entirely, resourceful, honest, built out of whatever was actually sitting in that kitchen, and better, in most cases, for it. Number 6, fried corn, cut straight off the cob, not creamed corn from a can, family. Fresh ears, cut close with a sharp knife, so you got the milk right along with the kernel, then fried slow in bacon grease with a little sugar, a little black pepper, until it went thick and sweet and slightly caramelized at the edges. This was a summer dish, made when the garden was giving generously, and it disappeared from most tables the same year that canned corn got cheap enough that nobody wanted to stand at a cutting board anymore. The whole block would smell it on a summer evening, drifting out through open windows because nobody had air conditioning yet. And you could tell whose mama was cooking what, just by walking down the street. Number 7, poke salad, gathered wild along the roadside. Now, child, let me tell you something. This one is almost completely gone now, and it deserves to be remembered precisely because it took real knowledge to make safely. Poke salad is a wild plant, and if you don't know exactly what you're doing, exactly how many times to boil it and drain it and boil it again, it will make you sick. But the women who knew, and plenty did, turned a plant growing wild along a ditch into a full meal, seasoned with a little fat back, simmered down soft, just like a pot of turnip greens. That's knowledge, family, passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, generation after generation. The kind of knowledge you can't get out of a cookbook, because a cookbook can't teach you what your own 2 eyes learned from watching your mother do it 100 times over. Now, before we keep going, family, I want to hear from you. What is the one dish from your childhood kitchen that nobody in your family makes the same way anymore? The one where you followed every step somebody wrote down, word for word, and it still doesn't taste the way it did the first time you had it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, somebody else scrolling through is going to see their own grandmother's kitchen sitting right there in your words. Number 8, smothered pork neck bones over rice. Cheap cut, long cook, deep, deep flavor. The neck bones browned first in a hot skillet, then smothered down in a gravy built right out of the fond, left in that same pot. Onions, a little garlic, black pepper heavy, for 2, sometimes 3 hours, until the meat surrendered completely and the gravy turned the color of strong coffee with a little cream stirred through it. This was a Tuesday dinner, family, a Wednesday dinner. Not a special occasion at all, just a regular weeknight, made by a woman who had already put in a full day of work somewhere else and still found a way to set something on that table that any restaurant in America would be lucky to plate today. Number 9, smothered rabbit with onion gravy. Now I know some of you just sat up a little straighter hearing that one. Rabbit, yes, family. In a lot of rural black households in the early 70s, rabbit wasn't a novelty at all. It was a Tuesday. A man kept traps out back the same way, another man kept a garden going, and whatever came in fed the family that week, same as the chickens did. Big Mama would dredge it heavy in peppered flour, brown it slow in bacon grease till the outside caught a little crust, then build the gravy right there in that same pan. It tasted like patience. It tasted like a household that understood you didn't need a butcher shop to eat well. You needed a trap line, a cast iron pot, and a woman who knew exactly how long was long enough. Number 10. Pig's feet, slow braised, not the jarred kind you find in the store now. Back in those days, a woman took pig's feet, cheap, plentiful, considered by some folks to be beneath them entirely, and turned them into something so tender the meat slid clean off the bone with barely a touch of a fork. Vinegar, onion, bay leaf, a long simmer, sometimes finished at the table with a hot pepper vinegar somebody's uncle kept in an old whiskey bottle. My granddaddy worked 6 days a week and never once complained, and he'd tell you the good cut of meat was whatever was on your plate that your family could afford, cooked with enough care that it tasted like more than what it cost. Number 11. Chitterlings, cleaned and cooked the old way, over 2 full days. I know some of you just made a face, and that's all right. This one was never for everybody, not even back then. It was a special occasion dish, saved for the holidays, usually taken on by whoever in the family had the patience of a saint. Here's what they don't tell you now, family. The reason chitterlings from 1973 tasted different from anything you might find today is because the cleaning alone could take the better part of a day, turning them inside out, rinsing again, removing every bit that didn't belong because cutting a corner on chitterlings will make you sick, and every woman in that kitchen knew it. Then the cooking, a full day more, with onion, vinegar, and a whole potato dropped in the pot to help pull the smell out. 2 days of labor for one pot of food that would be gone in 20 minutes flat once the family sat down to it. That's not something you do for convenience, family. That's something you do for love. Number 12. Hoppin' John, made with fresh field peas, not the can. Every New Year's, families still make some version of this. Black-eyed peas for luck, greens for money, cornbread for gold. But child, let me tell you something. What most folks are eating now is not what was on the table in 1971. Back then, if you were doing it right, you had fresh field peas, shelled by hand, at the kitchen table the night before, usually by whichever children in the house were deemed old enough to sit still that long. Simmered slow with a smoked hock, rice cooked separate and folded in at the very end so it never turned to mush. The whole block would smell it on New Year's morning, family, and I mean that literally. You could walk down a street and follow your nose house to house, and every single one had a pot going. Something got lost between the field pea and the can, and what got lost was the hours. The hours were the point. Number 13. Oxtail stew, cooked low for the better part of an afternoon. Now, this one's had a bit of a comeback lately, and I'll give credit where it's due, but the version you're paying $30 for, downtown, is a shadow of what was happening in a home kitchen in 1972. Oxtails were cheap then, considered a throwaway cut by folks who didn't know any better. Big Mama knew better. Browned hard first, then braised low and slow with butter beans and carrots and a little tomato, until the meat fell straight off the bone and the gravy turned dark and rich enough to eat with a spoon on its own. That right here, this is something we need to bring back, not as a $30 plate downtown, as a regular Sunday at your own table. Number 14. Tea cakes, cut round with the lid off a mason jar. No cookie cutters in most of these kitchens, family. No need for them. A woman rolled the dough out on a floured board, took the lid off whatever mason jar was closest, and pressed out perfect little rounds, one after another, baked until the edges just barely browned, and the middle stayed soft as a biscuit. Simple. Sweet. Made for children waiting on the porch after school, or for a preacher who'd stop by unannounced and needed something to go with his coffee. That was just how it was done. You made do with what was already sitting on the shelf, and you made it beautiful anyway. Now, family, we're coming into the part of this list where the food starts carrying a little more weight. Stay with me here, because this next stretch is where the real story of what got erased starts to show itself. Number 15. Smoked neck bones and rutabagas, cooked on the weeks the money ran thinner than usual. This wasn't Sunday best cooking, family. This was the meal that showed up when the check hadn't come yet, or the work had slowed down that month, or there were more mouths at the table than usual because a cousin had come to stay a while. Rutabagas were cheap, and they kept well in a cold cellar, and smoked neck bones stretched a small amount of meat across a whole pot of vegetables, and made it taste like it wasn't a hard week at all, even when everybody at that table knew good and well that it was. That's a particular kind of dignity, family. cooking something that tastes like abundance out of a week that had almost nothing in it. That's not a skill you learn in culinary school. That's a skill you learn from necessity. And it's a skill this whole country benefited from without ever once saying thank you for it. Number 16, cornmeal mush, served with a little sorghum syrup poured over the top. Breakfast most mornings in households where a full spread simply wasn't in the budget. Cornmeal cooked slow in water until it thickened into something between a porridge and a paste, spooned into bowls, sorghum drizzled over the top for whatever sweetness the family could afford that week. Some mornings it got fried the next day in leftover form, sliced and browned in a skillet, and called something entirely different by supper time. Folks don't do this anymore, and I understand why. Nobody wants to go back to eating out of necessity. But I want you to sit with this for a second, family. A whole generation of children grew up strong, grew up capable, grew up building families and churches and businesses of their own, fueled some mornings by nothing more than cornmeal and syrup. That's not a small thing. That's the foundation a lot of what we call Black excellence today was quietly built on top of. Number 17, fatback and gravy over rice. The meal that showed up when there wasn't much of anything else left in the house. This is the one family that I think a lot of us don't like to talk about because it sits close to something painful. There were weeks, and every family that lived through the 60s and 70s in a Black household in this country knows exactly what I'm talking about, where the icebox was close to bare, and what stood between a family and going without was a piece of fatback, sliced thin, fried down until the fat rendered out into the pan, and a gravy built from nothing but that fat, a little flour, and water, poured generously over a pot of rice. And here's the thing I need you to hear, family. Nobody who ate that meal remembers it as a tragedy. They remember it as their mother's hands, moving with total confidence, turning almost nothing into a full plate for everybody at that table. That's not a story about poverty. That's a story about a woman who refused to let her children know how close things were. Number 18. The bread made the winter the harvest came in short. Molasses bread, stretched to feed a house full of children on a single loaf's worth of flour. Some families had a particular winter, family, a bad crop year, a layoff, a sickness that ate through whatever savings there had been. And there was a bread that came out of those winters that doesn't have a fixed recipe because it was never really written down. It was whatever flour was left, stretched with molasses for sweetness and for calories, baked dense and dark, sliced thin so it went further. I've talked to women who are in their 80s now, who still remember the exact winter their family made that bread, and the exact way their mother's face looked while she was making it. Not defeated, family, determined. There's a difference, and children who grew up watching that difference carried it with them their whole lives. Number 19. The dish that only appeared the night before a homegoing, cooked not for the family that was grieving, but by the neighbors, so that family wouldn't have to cook at all. Family, this one isn't really about the food itself. It's about what the food meant. When somebody passed in a Black neighborhood in the 1970s, you did not see the grieving family standing over a stove. The women of that block took that job on themselves, quietly, without being asked, showing up the evening before with pots and casserole dishes and enough food to feed a house full of mourners for 3 straight days. Fried chicken, macaroni, greens. Whatever each woman was known for, she brought her version of it. And by the morning of the service, that grieving family's kitchen counter looked like a table set for a celebration they never wanted to have. Nobody organized this with a phone tree or a sign-up sheet. Family. It just happened the way it always happened because everybody understood without being told that grief was a communal responsibility, not a private one. You won't see that today, not the way it used to be. And I think that might be the single greatest loss on this entire list. And number 20, family. The last one. The one I want to close on. There is a recipe I cannot give you today. Not because I don't want to, because it doesn't exist anymore. Not on paper, not in a cookbook, not passed down in any form you could hold in your hand. Every family, if you go back far enough, has one of these. A dish that one woman made, and made a certain way, and never once wrote down, because in her mind, why would she need to? Everybody who needed to know already knew. That was just how it was done. And then she got older, and the kitchen got quieter. And one day, without anybody quite realizing it was happening, She was the only one left who remembered exactly how much of this, exactly how long of that, exactly what it was supposed to smell like when it was almost ready. And then she was gone, and the recipe went with her into the ground. The way a language dies when the last person who speaks it passes on and nobody thought to write it down while they still had the chance. That's the recipe they wanted you to forget, family. Not any single dish on this list. The idea itself. The idea that all of this, everything we just walked through together, was worth remembering in the first place. We didn't have much, but we had everything that mattered. And I think that's the whole truth sitting underneath everything we've covered today. Every dish on this list came out of a kitchen that didn't have extra money, didn't have modern convenience, didn't have anybody handing them a thing. What they had was knowledge and patience and a refusal to let anything go to waste. Not the cut of meat, not the wild plant by the road, not the last of the garden before the frost came through. Somewhere along the way, industrialization came in and told us all of that was something to leave behind. That slow was backward. That resourceful was something to be a little ashamed of. That convenience was progress, no matter what got quietly traded away to get there. I don't believe that, family. I believe what got traded away was a kind of wisdom this country still needs today, sitting right there in the memory of anybody old enough to have tasted it the first time around. That was just how it was done. And you won't see it today, not unless we bring it back ourselves, one pot, one story, one Sunday at a time. I'll see you next time, family.